Penultimate application. This application, sorry, can we settle down please? Thank you. This application relates to Hurst Road, Twyford. Most members of the planning committee attended a site visit last Friday, and this is going to be presented tonight by Mary Vaughan. We also have a range of people watching to participate as well. So straight across to you, Frank.
Thank you, Chair. So the site is in Twyford, which is a major development location, behind properties on Hurst Road and near to Orpington Close. It's an allocated housing site in the MDD for around 20 dwellings. However, the application itself is for 12 dwellings, and that is on the plan there is in the red line. The black and white line shows the rest of the allocated site. Members went on a site visit, so I'll show a few photos. 58 Hurst Road is the bungalow to the left of the picture, and has direct access to the field behind. The field is generally open, but with trees and hedgerows at the boundaries. And this photo is taken from the southwest corner looking towards 58 Hurst Road. Turning slightly to the left, you can see the rear of the other properties on Hurst Road. And further to the left, you can see also a small orchard. Hurst Road itself is a busy main road linking Twyford and Hurst. A new access is proposed onto this with the application. The application, as said, is for 12 dwellings following the demolition of 58 Hurst Road. Then a new access road will be put in with a turning head. There's a denser group of dwellings to the east, and then a looser form of development to the west. The application did originally propose an area of public open space. We felt this was difficult to access and there was no natural surveillance of it from the surrounding properties. So we asked for this to be removed, and we feel that this layout now is much better and enables all of the dwellings to be accommodated on the site with appropriate landscaping, parking and amenity space. In terms of the main issues, in terms of character, we feel that it is a large enough development to create its own character, and it is appropriate scale and design for the area. It meets all the separation distances, and therefore there is no harmful impact on loss of light, overbearing or overlooking for neighbouring properties. Parking provision is also considered to be acceptable. So subject to conditions, there is considered to be no harmful impacts on environmental health, landscaping, internal space standards, garden depths or biodiversity. For clarification, all the garden depths are met except for plot 12, which is slightly below the standard but is far wider than needs to be, and therefore we consider that to be acceptable. Also, a Section 106 agreement has been signed, and therefore financial contributions towards infrastructure will be provided. The main issue on the site is with regards to flooding, so I will kind of outline the history of the site and with regards to that. Back when we were allocating sites in preparation for the MDD, we looked at this site and we asked for a flood risk assessment to be submitted with it. That flood risk assessment at the time stated that the majority of the site was in flood zone 1. And therefore we felt that this enabled us to put forward the site for allocation. Turning then to the application, we also asked for an updated flood risk assessment to be submitted. Again, this concluded that the site was in flood zone 1. This is slightly different to what the EA flood maps say in terms of the site being in flood zone 2. I would highlight that the flood maps are there as a kind of a guide and are quite broad stroke. They are not necessarily specific, and they cannot guarantee that every at a site level that it would be correct. The reason that the site is being shown as being in flood zone 1 is due to the fact that a topographic model has been made of the site, and this shows that the height of the land on the site is actually above the level of flood zone 2, and that is why it's being designated as flood zone 1 in the FRA. Furthermore, subject to a condition that the mitigation methods of the FRA are carried out, there is no objection from the Environment Agency. This is just to show the difference in terms of the flood zones. On the left, you will see the site is site is defined in red. The blue hatched area is flood zone 3 as per the EA flood maps, and the further blue line to the right is then the edge of flood zone 2. As per the topographic survey, the site is therefore then on the right, being shown as only a small part in flood zone 2, as shown by that blue line to bottom left. Residents have pointed out a video that was made in the 2014 February flood event. So I've taken still from that. The larger red square that you can see is the application site. The smaller is the rest of the allocation site.
It's very hard to see.
Sorry, I will point it out. Wow.
So just point out, unfortunately, there was an issue established yesterday with the lighting in here. It was dimmable, which would have made this a lot visible, but it developed a fault. The electrician came in and was unhappy with the wiring and insisted he put a normal switch in until it could be resolved. So we either have no light or full light. So sorry if this is a bit challenging.
Right, for clarification, that area there is the application site, and this area here is the rest of the allocated site. Okay? Just to go through the members' update, there's a few minor alterations to the report, but also, firstly, something from the Highways Officer, just to clarify. The overall carriageway width of Hurst Road would be reduced with the removal of the central hatching. The scheme refers to 3 metre wide running lanes. However, this would need to be amended as part of a highways agreement outside the planning application to ensure that the minimum running lanes would actually be 3.05 metres. However, this is not considered to have any significant impact on the visibility space or footway width. Also, some clarification with regards to affordable housing. The site is within a major development location and a greenfield site. Therefore, as per CP5 of the core strategy, the requirement for affordable housing is 35% of the net increase. The net increase for the site is 11 dwellings, and 35% of this equates to 3.85. Therefore, the provision of 4 affordable units exceeds the policy requirement. Members asked for some clarification regarding some of the site levels. I asked the agent to clarify this, so I'll just run through the information that we received. This is based on the topographic survey that I spoke of regarding the flood risk assessment. So the height of the end of the gardens at Hurst Road are stated as being 40.1 metres above ordnance acre. And then the floods level quoted by the EA for the 1 in 1,000 year event, which flood zone 2 level, is 36.43 metres. Therefore, those properties are 3.5 metres above that 1 in 1,000 year flood level. The DPC, in terms of the damp cruise course level for the new properties, isn't something that has been agreed yet. It will be something that would be agreed at a later stage. However, it would be these would be significantly above the 1 in 1,000 year event as stated. There is also, in the members' update, further correspondence from, firstly, neighbours. You'll notice there's a fair few emails. Also, a letter from us to Theresa May in response to some of the comments that have been made. Also, there was a resident that contacted the Environment Agency recently regarding the site. So if I can ask members just to turn to the rear of the appendix to the members' update. If you just go a couple of pages back, you'll see a large map on one page, and then the page before that, if you just have a quick look at that. So one of the residents asked somebody from the Environment Agency, could they clarify what flood zones the site was in. The person from the Environment Agency came back and said that it would be majority of flood zone 2. We did query that as it was against the advice of what they had previously said. You will see that there is an email from Dawn Cooper received today clarifying what she meant, and that was simply in response to the question as whether or not the site was majority flood zone 2. You'll also see that she says that the advice that we received previously was based on the modelling from Lower Loddon, the flood risk assessment and surveys of the land. And this is the information that we received from the Environment Agency as part of our formal consultation, and therefore that is the comments that stand.
Just Graham, I'm just going to...
Which emails are you talking about?
It's about the email that's headed up. It says it's from WT Inquiries dated 1st of April. It's a left-hand page.
That's correct.
You got it now?
It's really on there.
Okay. At the very end there, the last paragraph, it says they then conclude the site is in majority flood zone 2. Who is the they that's referred to there, please?
So the team at the EA who were
This is
dealing with
the EA.
yes, who were dealing with the consultation response.
Thank you. Yes. So is this an issue of basically somebody on the customer service desk simply looking at some base information as opposed to somebody from their technical team giving a different interpretation? Is that correct?
Essentially, yes. Obviously, I don't want to prejudice the EA, but yes, that is ultimately, I think, what's happened.
Okay. Did you finish up?
No.
Okay. Right. We now come on to those registered to speak. And firstly, can I call Rob Yeadon, representing himself and other residents. What you do pictures? Oh, yes. Ready? We can see that quite. The committee can see it. Okay. Right.
Thank you. We believe that the planning process has been flawed from the outset. The inclusion of this site into the NDD was based upon incorrect information. An incorrect flood zone status was provided, which at best meant the site should have received a neutral score rather than a positive one. The consultation process was not at all inclusive. It sought only the views of the residents of number 47 and 58 Hurst Road, both of whom stand to benefit from planning being granted. No other residents have been approached. The NPPF requires the local planning authority to apply a sequential test in all stages of planning. And we believe the fact that no sequential test was undertaken cast doubts on the site's inclusion into the NPD. We believe that WBC planning is using a loophole to avoid the necessity to further a sequential test. The planning application demonstrates a lack of knowledge of the area by all interested parties. According to the Land Registry, 58 Hurst Road, titled BK 44241, demonstrates there is a restrictive covenant, which we believe is breached by Plot 1. We note with interest an email that was received 16th of March by WBC from the Environment Agency stating the land could be deemed Zone 1. We too received an email on 30th stating the majority of the site is in Zone 2. Given the importance of this issue, we believe the Environment Agency should visit the site in order to conduct a full and thorough survey of this application can be accepted. Little account has been taken of a medium to high risk surface flooding from the Hurst Road. The culvert running down the border of 46 Hurst Road and through the site was initially missed by the FRA, and nothing subsequently has been changed to manage it. Mr. Burgess of 46 Hurst Road states that at no time has a survey taken place on his land, and is yet to receive any responses to any of his emails. The proposed site's drainage options are flawed. The residents of Orpington Close already cope with an inferior sewage system and have been subject to groundwater flooding following sustained periods of rainfall. The option of running the surplus water through to Orpington Close must be rejected and a viable maintenance plan agreed before planning is granted. Thames Water Sewer Report is in respect of land behind 57 Hurst Road and as such can be deemed inaccurate. There are other issues such as the proposed pitch of the garage roofs that are not in keeping with the surrounding houses. We maintain that some of the gardens are too short and contravene planning regulations. The environmental impact of the site seems to have been given short shrift. There is plenty of wildlife and other flying things around. Affordable housing constitutes less than the minimum 35% required. The site in Arbor Lane, Winnersh, highlights planning inconsistencies. In November 2014, you ruled that no development will be permitted in flood zone 2. How is this site any different? An email from Piers Brunning of WBC states that no Twyford schools will benefit from Section 96 funds, so we're not sure how that benefits our community. We would request that you reject the application until the inaccuracies and disputed points have been answered satisfactorily. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I invite Jim Bailey. Jim?
Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. In 2012, the Council proposed allocation of this site in the Managing Development Delivery Plan. In 2013, the MDD and the allocation of the site was subject to an examination by a government inspector. The MDD was found sound by the inspector and it was adopted by the Council in February 2014. In summer 2013, we submitted a scheme of 18 houses to the Council for pre-application consideration. We were told by the planning officer that the scheme was overdevelopment and we should reduce it to nearer 12 houses. In March last year, we held a public exhibition in Twyford, which was attended by many local residents and members. And following on from the feedback we received and in line with the earlier received pre-application advice, we reduced the scheme again to 12 houses, which is the current application. In October last year, we submitted the application, and following discussions with the planning officer, we submitted amended plans in January of this year. It is these amended plans which are recommended for approval this evening. With regard to the planning issues, I have very little to add to the officer's report. After a considerable amount of work over several years, we are proposing a scheme that will minimise any potential impact on key issues such as access, highway safety, parking, amenity space, ecology, trees, residential amenity, etc. The scheme will create more than 50 jobs, will help to meet the pressing need for more housing, especially affordable housing in the form of 2 social rented and 2 shared equity homes, and it will provide additional funds for local schools, leisure and sports facilities, libraries and highways. I'm fully understanding the local residents are concerned about flooding and drainage. It was one of the main issues that we discussed at the public exhibition last year. But the weight of evidence submitted by our specialist consultants, which has been ratified by the Council's own consultants and the Environment Agency, makes it clear that the vast majority of the site is not in a flood zone, and it can be, it's in flood zone 1, and it can be successfully developed without putting residents at risk. So I submit that the application should be approved as recommended by the planning officer.
Okay, thank you very much. And finally, Councillor T. Tomlin, board member. No.
Could our members please turn to page 227? And on that page, on the planning space, it does actually say land liable to flooding. I am really concerned for residents. The residents are the people who live there. People on planning committee make decisions. You know, as members, we don't necessarily have to live there. They know what the situation is. Huge amounts of objections. Over 90 objections have come in. When I saw the information coming through about whether it was in flood zone 1, 2 or 3, I really cannot understand how it's become such a mess. It was very, I mean, we've heard some information this evening. Didn't actually see the members' update. I've not seen that. But I'm not happy about the situation. It is clear that this area floods. People have lived there. There is information from local residents. As for planning gain, or 106 as we call it, I'm not convinced that Twyford would actually see any of that money and benefit from that. I think this needs to go back to the drawing board and be looked at, certainly in terms of the flooding situation, because I'm not happy, the residents aren't happy, and the confusion over this, I still don't understand how it's actually happened. It does seem like a bit of an old mess. There are some bits and pieces from the parish council who obviously know the area very well. It's in their parish, and they're actually really concerned about the flooding issue as well. The allotments are actually near this, and they quite often flood. So I would ask for some sense today and to look at this again, because there are clearly some serious issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That concludes the speakers.
Steve, can you turn the thing on?
So that concludes the speakers. So, Lindsay, I'm going to come to you first as local board member.
Thank you very much. I did attend the session that was referred to by the applicant at Loddon Hall in the autumn, and we had a very lengthy discussion about the problems with flooding. We had a site visit on Friday. I think we all came away with very wet feet. It was, since I've been on the council and on the planning committee since 2012, this was the wettest site I can remember visiting. It's boggy, and it isn't just at the bottom, it's all down the slope. In fact, I'd already gone about 5 or 6 yards in when I heard from behind one of the members saying they had wet feet, and they'd only just got on the site. So I think there's more than an issue here of whether it's flood zone 1, 2 or 3. The issue is that the site itself, being on the slope, has a culvert right in the middle. That should give you a big warning signal that water comes down. And the water comes down probably from Stanlake Meadow, down Winchcombe Road, across Hurst Road and down. And looking at the driveway of 58, the gravel and that seem to be slightly down. I reckon water goes down through there. So in addition to the issue of what flood zone it is, and it quite clearly states zone 3, zone 2, and I know we've had subsequent emails, but the EA have indicated in the email that I had before that this was predominantly flood zone 2. In fact, it should be fair to the applicants, the Harrington FRA clearly states that 85% of the site is zone 2 and 15% is zone 1. So even the applicants recognised that this was a 2, 3, 1, etc. So the issue is that this is a site that is clearly very close to the Broadhinton stream. It's only just a few yards over the end of the bottom, and then further to that is the Long River. It is an area that is very wet and very boggy. I come to the point of how is this site in the MDD. Now the MDD process started before I was on the council, and my predecessor Stephen Conway advised me that he objected to this site being included in the MDD. So I'm not sure exactly why, but I suppose if you drew a map and looked at it and said you drew a straight line from Orpington Close to Loddon View, which is the other side, yes, it doesn't change the curtilage of the village, but you have to look at the site to see what the problem is. It's a sloping site and it is exceedingly boggy with a culvert right in the middle. Now that should send major warning signals. So I've referred to page 4 of the application. Right, I have concerns about the flood defences. The current system used in Orpington Close, that was underwater in 2014. I'm not sure if that picture that was shown of us actually shows when it was right at the full extent or not. because I know that area down the bottom. I spoke to the resident at number 60 Close, and the water came up to 1 inch on his wall, and that is right in the same line. If you stand there, it's in the same line as half of the site. I didn't get into the site myself during that winter period, so I can't tell, but I have concerns that if you put water defences on one which is already struggling, that would be satisfactory. And now I refer to a document that was agreed at last week's executive, last Thursday. It's titled Local Flood Risk Management Strategy. It has 6 objectives. Most of the objectives would apply to this site, but I read out 2 of them in particular. Objective number 3 and objective number 4. And as this has been adopted, this is our strategy. Number 3, ensure that planning and decisions take full account of flood risk, avoiding development in inappropriate locations, preventing an increase in flood risk and minimising existing flood risk wherever possible. 04, maintain and where necessary improve local flood risk management, infrastructure and features, as well as privately owned flood defence assets and ordinary water courses to reduce risk. I would say that the application that we have before us fails those 2 objectives, and I shall be recommending refusal of this application.
Thank you. Bob?
Yeah, thank you, Simon. I too attended the site visit, and I have to say I did so with a completely open mind, as the site was in the MDD and I assumed it was a suitable site. Within about 6 paces of walking on the site, I thought this ground's very soft, and it didn't get any better. It was soggy, boggy, and there's not a place I would buy a house. The water's got to be coming from somewhere, and I think it's totally unsuitable, and I would support Lindsay's recommendation.
Chris?
Thank you. Well, wet underfoot doesn't necessarily mean flooding.
I didn't say it did.
I didn't attend the site visit, but there's even 1 or 2 principles here. If we were to refuse this, then if we were to go to appeal, we would be putting forward a principle that we shouldn't build houses on this site. But this is a site which is in the MDD and has had an examination in public, which was successful. How would an appeal play out in taking that into account?
Yes, certainly. I think, Chairman, thank you. I think I might need a bit of help from Graham. So, if you, my understanding, Graham, is on the site, at the stage that the site allocation was considered for including it in the NDD as an allocated site. My understanding is at that stage a FRA was undertaken, and that clarified that the site was suitable for residential development. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Members, I think one of the concerns I've got by listening to this is that there seems to be an awful lot of discussion about is it flood zone 1, is it flood zone 2? I think what we need, to my mind, a lot of that is quite academic. I think that it's academic in light of the fact that there's been a significantly more detailed study of this site in an FRA, and that FRA has looked at the details of the specific site circumstances. If it was, I mean, as Graham's already indicated, the Environment Agency maps are quite broad brush, and in actual fact it's been acknowledged by officers very recently that they're quite considerably out of date as well, and we as officers are looking at funding. I think we've secured the funding now to be able to review our information on the strategic flood risk assessments and all the rest, all of our other information bases. So I think that the fact that the EA maps might differ from what a detailed study is probably given quite limited weight. I think what we need to focus on is what the FRA has shown. And the FRA has shown it's been technically assessed by our expert, and WSP have looked at it, and they are in agreement that the site is suitable for residential accommodation. So in terms of just going back through that process again, it was allocated in the MODD on the back of the technical information that was available at that stage with the submitted FRA. It was allocated, even though it's so specifically, it's allocated as a presumption in favour of development. If subsequently officers came to a view that the site was not suitable for residential development for a reason we couldn't foresee in the MDD allocation, we wouldn't be putting it to you now for a recommendation for approval. This has been submitted as part of, the FRA has been submitted to support the application. The advice is that it is acceptable for residential accommodation. As officers, we are putting it forward for approval on the back of that expert advice.
That's a question, I'll come back.
So it would in fact be possible to pull the site from the MDD, would it?
No, it would, in my view, if we could demonstrate that significant harm or a change in circumstances that means that on further investigation that the site is not suitable for development, then in that instance, and I think just because it's allocated doesn't mean automatically it's acceptable. We'd have egg on our faces, of course, because we wouldn't have done. It meant that during the MDD process we wouldn't have fully examined the information available to us. But it's the same premise as we've seen tonight. We've got an application allocated for a certain number of units, and they demonstrate that they can get more on there without harm being caused. It's kind of the reverse situation of that, really.
Okay, Lindsay, you want to come back?
Yes, it's my understanding that the FRA that was used at the time that the NDD site was allocated didn't even include the culvert. So if an FRA doesn't include a culvert, I'm afraid I don't have any confidence in the FRA because I had to do a second one. That's my understanding. And secondly, the first question, I think Claire's partly answered it. And the first question I asked Graham when this came up is just because the site is on the MDD doesn't mean that a planning application will be approved. And Graham came back that it would depend upon the planning application. And the issue I have with this planning application is that the 5-bedroom houses, particularly 3, 4 at the bottom, are right down in the bottom part of the site. That is very, very close, if not in Zone 2, and I've already asked questions on previous ones, both at the Winnersh application at Arbor Lane, where we actually had a 6-month condition to check the site was suitable before work even started, and that was Flood Zone 1, and there was no properties to be built in Flood Zone 2. And at the last planning application, where we had the Arbor application, I specifically asked the question whether any houses being built or any properties being built on Flood Zone 2, and the answer was no. So I think that we have an issue here that on the EA maps they're showing 2 and 3, even the planning documentation shows groundwater Zone 3, Flood Zone 2. The Harrington's report on page 4 of their FRA shows Zone 2 85%, Zone 1 15%. And an email which we refer to, but did confirm on the 30th of March, which is the one before your 1st of April, which is for the same person, I can confirm that the post-development site falls within Flood Zone 2 and 1. The majority of the site development will be within Flood Zone 2. And that's from the EA, who came back and said that's what they had from the maps. Now, what else do you do when they send text alerts to residents in Orpington Close to warn them of flooding?
Lindsay, could you just tell us what the date on that email is you just read?
30th of March.
Right, okay. So we have one on the 1st of April, which is today, which gives contradictory information.
Not entirely.
Okay, so it says at the end, they then concluded the site is in majority Flood Zone 1. It's the technical department, the EA, as opposed to customer services. Who
Well, I'm sorry, if I have an email from the EA dated 30th of March saying 2-1 and then 1-2, I have absolutely no confidence in the EA.
Okay,
And we're being based, they are only advisory, remember?
Yes, sure.
They are advisory, not actually we have to do with it. It says to me that the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing.
So clearly, Lindsay, you've drawn our attention to deficiencies in the Environment Agency, which I think we're all familiar with and not responsible for. So let's ask somebody from WSP who has been looking at this on behalf of the council to give us some comments. Can you try and do that, please?
Certainly. Right, it's important to understand the difference that the flood map, as has been said, is an approximate map based on sort of LiDAR data, aerial data, and that is the official flood map, which is for planning guidance. And that does show, as we've been shown, that it's in flood zone 2. However, if you then do a topographical survey or more detailed survey and show, based on the actual river model levels that the EA provided from the technical department and compare that to the actual site level, you can then show this outside the 1,000 year level, therefore technically flood zone 1. But the flood map still shows it in flood zone 2. Ultimately, they may, if a study is done, they may adjust the flood map. So it's both right in the sense that on the flood map it is in flood zone 2.
I'm certainly not going to take the risk to approve something to be built in an area. I'm certainly not going to take the risk of approving something about whether it's in this and such like. I suspect it's probably down to about 10 millimetres or maybe this much difference between one and the other.
And am I correct in saying that the small proportion of the site that is apparently confirmed as being flood zone 2 is the bottom of the garden?
Yes. And in actual fact, Chairman, if I may just clarify, what we've been done is that the garden depth, so the bit that is the detailed information on site that's identified where the flood zones truly are on the ground. What that has also done is it's, and maybe we can just go back to that plan actually, I think Graham put it up earlier. What that shows is that hatched bit there. And in actual fact, what we've done is we've taken a measurement from the rear elevation of the properties, and those gardens are actually 11 metres to that boundary. So it's not as if, because one of the concerns I have was, oh my goodness, we half the gardens in an area which is likely to flood. So that means it's not really usable amenity space. So if it's only 5 metres deep, but in actual fact, the depth of the garden to that point is actually 11 metres. So there is that 11 metre amenity space which is usable.
If I could,
No, we can have some other speakers, and see, I will come back to you, but Chris.
Thank you, Simon. I'd like to maybe look at it just from a practical point of view. That if you look at the update, page 11, and the paragraph that starts the historic flood maps. Now, the historic flood maps show the flood extent is 40.1 metres contour. And this would suggest that if the historic flood maps are believed to be correct, then the 1991 flood level would have a return period significantly larger than the 1 in 1,000 year event. Clearly this cannot be the case. Now, I actually don't see the logic in that, because who's to say that the 1,000 year flood, the 1,000 year flood event is right, and the 1991 is wrong. So I think that you could argue one against the other and not really get anywhere. But so I come back to our site visits. We know that there are certain properties which did flood, and we have a clear data from the properties that have flooded as to where the actual level is. Never mind the 1,000 year, never mind 1991, we've got a recent example. Now, I read these figures that flood level was at 40 metres, and here we are, we're told that DPC is going to be 36.2 metres. Well, to me that says that the flood depth could be 4 metres or 13 feet. Now, I think there is such uncertainty over this that what I if I have the chance to put forward an alternative proposal, is actually that we go back and we look at what is the recent experience, where did the flood get to, and if we transfer that down along the river course, what datum should we safely adopt? Thank you.
Who's going to clarify that?
Okay, maybe I can ask a question. Maybe if you could help me answer. My understanding is it's not that simple of just looking at where it stopped and how that transfers onto another site. Is that correct?
Yes, I think it is known that the historic flood level in this area aren't necessarily accurate, but the more recent modelling is much more accurate, and that's what's the basis of the EA providing levels for the 1,000 year level. There was another point I was going to make before, is that even in flood zone 2, it's permissible to build. On sequential tests you try and avoid it, but there's no technical reason why you can't build in flood zone 2 actually. But the modelling and the actual level of the site compared to the modelled river levels show that it's actually in flood zone 1.
Okay, we'll just hear from some of the speakers. Rochelle?
I'm concerned with the surface water flooding as well. I owned a house on a hill once. They told me it was a little damp in the basement. The first winter, I had 2 or 3 inches of rain going through the basement, going downhill. After several thousand of flood defenses built by myself, it suddenly wasn't much of a problem. But I also learned why there's a channel underneath in the basement floor going this way, because that's where the water went down. So I'm just concerned that all of these things are going to flood, and why aren't we actually preventing them from building in a place that's going to flood? It's just going to cost the borough some money somewhere along the line, and I don't believe they're going to have a very good luck trying to find insurance, because I can't get insurance from about 3/4 of the companies, and I'm within 300 yards of a flood course. That has never flooded in my house, never flooded within 100 feet or 200 feet from my house, and it's still impossible. We're going to have a real fun time with that. I know it's not playing, but I just
that
think it's wrong.
demonstrates, Rochelle, why the overall broad Environment Agency flood maps are wrong, because somebody's looked at that map and says your house is subject to flooding.
Yeah.
Just to confirm to us it's not. So there's a classic example of where these overarching Environment Agency maps are proved to be imprecise. Not wrong, but imprecise. And we've heard that the more detailed flood assessments that have been done that look at much more specific sites and get together a lot more specific data come up with a different result. And our unfortunate job as lay people on the committee is to try and take guidance from professionals and interpret that and make decisions.
What is it, 36 feet that it floods? 36 or 40? Which one is it? What level does it require to flood? And that's the question. Do we have an answer?
I'm not sure what the safety flood level is, but it's as the Environment Agency gave their information that 1,000 year level is below the level of the site, just touches the edge of the site in the gardens.
Which is the hatch mark there on the left.
If I could just add as well, it's not necessarily just a case of a certain height and it floods or it doesn't flood. You are talking about a volume of water required to occupy a space before you can say that it floods. So I think it's quite difficult to simply draw a line across that site and say yes or no. It is a case of actually how much volume of water is required, because by the time you actually get up to something that's near the houses, the volume required is, you'd be talking such a huge amount that none of us would be here at all. So I think it's quite difficult to say that.
Is it taking into account climate change?
Okay.
Yes, yeah, the FRA did take that into account.
It has a plus 20% figure, doesn't it? Yeah. Bob?
Yeah, I just want to return to this flood risk assessment we keep getting told about. I'm actually not concerned about the river levels, and that's going to sound like an anathema to most people. I'm more concerned about the water coming down from the other end of the site. The flood risk assessment does not actually make a heck of a difference to my decision on this application.
Okay.
My decision is the fact that I walked on the ground and it was boggy, soggy and horrible. And I'd like to know whether our assessment was done of biodiversity assessment, whether actually somebody went out and walked the site and looked at the site.
Now that we're talking about the surface water, the drainage strategy for the site, and that was something that has been re-reviewed because we've had initial concerns about that. So there's a planning condition for the implementation of a drainage strategy to control, where obviously it's a soggy site because it's got topsoil and clay lenses probably in it, but the drainage strategy's got to deal with that. They've got to come up with proposals to deal with any existing drainage culverts or things on site when they do a detailed investigation. So, I mean, if there's a slope, that makes it easier to some extent. You can take water around. If it's a very flat site, that's more difficult to drain.
The whole slope is soggy.
I think that
Okay, no, come on, Malcolm.
Well, you mentioned earlier there were two maps. One was the flood zone map that the EA uses, and it's got all those dark blue patterns on it. And then the other one was a topographical map which showed less. From my understanding, really, over what period of time is that data obtained to get this patch and that patch? Is it based on a year's worth of measurements over a period of time, or is it readings taken on a particular date, or historical? So how long a period is it to know how representative it is?
Well, there's two answers. The topographical survey is obviously existing now information. The river model is built from rain gauge data and monitoring of river flows over many, many years, 30, 40 years at each gauging station. So that is based
It could be more accurate. Well, it should be more accurate. If it's over a longer period of time, more real readings in it, it's likely to be more accurate than just a short-term measurement.
Yes. I mean, the river model, the levels predicted by the river model are built up over many years of rainfall data, many years of monitoring of many rivers in the UK. So.
And that's the one that shows the larger flooding?
No, that's what gives the river the model, the levels in the river model, which are then compared with the topographical survey. The EA map hasn't got the benefit of the accurate level information.
Okay. Right. Lindsay, did you want to comment?
Yes, I'd like to come back. I mentioned about the FRA that was used at the time of the MDD. Can anyone confirm to me whether that did or did not include the a culvert? Because I understand there had to be a new FRA done.
Lindsay, MDD is approved. It's been approved by a planning inspector. I think it would be unwise of us, Mary, I don't know what your view is on this, but it would be unwise of us to start challenging the accuracy or otherwise of the MDD, because certainly we don't have that information as a panel, and it has been examined at some length. I don't know how many days it was over, but weeks, it was several weeks by a planning inspector, who, as you know, a lot, planning inspectors' decisions trump our decisions. So I'd suggest that we should not explore challenging with the MDD with right. There may be other areas that you wish to explore.
Yes, I've mentioned the fact there's the culvert there and the impact on Orpington Close. I'd like to understand what the mitigation process will be to deal with that, and whether what has been put in place is secure. Because I did see the area at the bottom of Orpington Close at its worst, and it was very, very close. Now, any more water that goes onto that can only have an impact on other properties, and I think that needs a very clear issue to be looked at. The site with the boggy bit, the point is that we visited it here at the end of March in a fairly dry winter. It would have been very interesting to know what that site was like last winter. It may not have been fully underwater, but I bet it was pretty wet. And if we are trying to allow houses to be built on a site, particularly the 5-bedroom houses at the bottom, where the chances are that there could be water coming in through their front door and out the back, I think we have a duty of care to make sure that we don't allow something, MDD or not.
I'm going to ask Claire to sit. provide us a little clarity, and then I'll be coming back to you, Lindsay, to see whether you want to put an alternative proposal forward. So perhaps you'd be thinking about that in the meantime.
Chairman, I completely understand members' dilemmas because we aren't technical experts and we have to rely on the advice that we're given. I think that there is I think whether or not it's flood zone 1 or flood zone 2 is a red herring, because at the end of the day, what matters is what the flood risk assessment has shown and what mitigation measures have been put forward as part of this proposal in order to overcome some of those issues. So I think that it is a red herring. I think we should move away and we should look at the individual circumstances in this case. To my mind, there's a number of things. There's on-site and there's off-site. So on-site, we've got two types of flooding here. One is your fluvial flooding. So essentially, that's kind of what's related to the flood zone. It's where the levels are, whether or not it's likely that the site's going to get wet. And we've heard tonight from, and it's included in the update, details about levels, details about where that water should come to in order to enable and ensure that the site is suitable for housing. The advice that has been given is that technical advice is that the site is suitable for residential development. In the event that this application is refused on the basis of that issue, that information will need to be examined, and I can only advise that our technical experts are saying that it's acceptable. So we are in a very difficult position trying to put forward to the planning inspectorate that is not acceptable. So that's one issue. I think the other one is the pluvial flooding, which is the surface water. And there are conditions relating to drainage recommended as part of this application. And as part of the application, there are potential for benefits in terms of site. An engineered solution to drainage on site is often better than what's there at the moment. There is room for betterment, and there's a condition available which would ensure that as officers and as you know, we would obviously be able to look at that to make sure that all those things are fully addressed as part of any conditions application. So I think that's another thing. We need to be able to look, you know, say, well, there is an option here for us to improve the surface water issues. I think finally, in terms of flooding, there is the issue about impact on adjacent properties. Yeah, the impact on the neighbours, not the people who are going to live there, but actually the neighbouring properties. And this application has been fully assessed in accordance with our normal requirements, and it has been concluded by our technical experts that this will not have an unacceptable impact on adjacent uses and adjacent properties. So I think with all those things taken into account, if members are minded to refuse this on flooding grounds, it's going to leave us in an exceptionally difficult position justifying that in an appeal. Because we haven't got the technical support to enable us to do that.
Okay, and also remind members that on an earlier application we had professional advice from, what I'll loosely term, both sides. And on this case we have technical advice only from the applicant and council. We don't have a contrary technical view from the residents. And as you know, planning inspectors look at the professional nature of advice that is provided. And sadly, rightly or wrongly, people tend to attach little weight to what they might consider unsubstantiated reports of flooding as opposed to technical reports. That's not our fault, it's just a fact that planning inspectors seem to do that. So, Chris, do you want to come back?
Sorry,
we need to motor on a bit now.
Yes, appreciate that. Simon, just quickly on this, rather than necessarily considering refusal, it's really a question of procedure. Can we consider a condition which says that the condition is that the 36.2 datum will be reviewed in the light of recent flooding and the extent to which it has gone, rather than refusing the application?
Well, don't forget that the advice that's submitted with this report is based on the most recent available information. So I don't see how there would be other more recent, even more recent information. They've based it on the current available, most recent information. So there won't be any more data to consider it against.
Could I
Okay,
just...
Mary, comment here?
Well, just to say that listening to everybody, you know, as Claire said, we're going to be in a very different position. If it's that there is certainly presumption of development on this site, backed up by the MDDF and also our experts. We are not all experts. We're listening to anecdotal advice. There's just a bit of a warning that we may be subject to costs if this goes to appeal. That's all.
Okay. I think that's exhausted what most people have to say. Lindsay, I think you're going to come forward with a proposal.
Yes, I think bearing in mind the issue of refusal, I think that I would have to ask for a deferral because there has been such confusion, and the fact that there's only been emails coming back from the EA this last week and having one saying one thing one day and another thing saying another day, there is sufficient confusion for there to be a review and also pick up the type of point that Chris has just made so that we can absolutely clearly identify that this has got all the attributes, because I don't have confidence that this site won't flood. The fact that it is so boggy in March this year, you have a thunderstorm and a rain, water is coming down from Stanlake Meadow, because that's where the water resides at, and it's got to be coming down Winchcombe Road to get to that site. That's the only direction it can come from. And that site at the top is boggy in the first place. I know because I walk my dogs there regularly. So I will take the point about refusal. I'll take the issue up of MDD outside of this because I feel that there's something needs to be looked at on that. So I will change from refusal to deferral so that we can cover all the issues, so that we can absolutely clearly have factual information.
Okay, before I seek a seconder on your proposal for deferral, I think we need to just check a few points. Lindsay, as you said yourself, the Environment Agency is not a statutory consultee in this. So we could very conveniently ignore all the confusion that the Environment Agency have clearly created with contradictory advice. And we could rely solely on the advice submitted by the applicant, overlaid with what we've heard as evidence from residents about previous flooding events and your own local knowledge. And then ask WSP, who after all have reviewed this FRA and found it to be sound. So I'm struggling to see, I'm afraid this is a bit of an echo of the last one, what a deferral would actually achieve.
Okay, I'll review. I'll go back to my original proposal to refuse.
Okay, right. Would you like to give a reason for refusal?
Because there is a high degree of uncertainty as to whether the area would flood. I believe it is in breach of the objectives 03 and 04 of the recently agreed local flood risk management strategy.
Okay. Can we just...
Did you catch that?
Yeah, I did. Can we just check this flood risk strategy that's just been to the executive? Is it strategy? Is it policy?
Chairman, through you, it is a strategy. It is not a policy. The policy is in the MDD and the policy is in the core strategy. However, there is regard to our strategy and it is a material planning consideration. However, I think there's a fundamental disagreement between what officers are advising and what Councillor Ferris is suggesting, is that we feel because it's been demonstrated that the site is not because the site is acceptable for development and that the proposal is acceptable, that it doesn't contravene those policies, those requirements in that strategy.
Could I make a minor suggestion that, and then we'll see if it's seconded and go to a vote on this. That really you're saying it's concerns about, sorry, my apologies, concerns about flooding. due to contradictory advice from the Environment Agency.
Yes,
Okay.
is part of it, definitely.
Would you want to add any more to it? Because clearly,
And I'm concerned about the surface flooding. Definitely the site being boggy it gives indications that there water would come down, and the fact the culvert is there and that was still flowing quite strong. I'm concerned that there could be a flash flood, a thunderstorm, and water would come down the culvert, and any properties there could be flooded.
so saying surface water
Flooding.
caused by pluvial.
I bow to people's engagement. I also check what the CP issue is on flooding. I don't know, is it 7? I can't remember the numbers. The CP. Is it CP 7?
I don't know, I can't remember.
Let's just check that.
But
We can supplement that with that. So, is there a member who wishes to second that proposal? Right. So we have a valid proposal to refuse it on grounds that the surface water flooding concerns because of pluvial events and because of concern of flooding due to contradictory flood concerns because of the contradictory advice that we have received and residents have received from the Environment Agency. Okay, but all those members wishing to support that proposal for refusal, could you please show? 1, 2, 3. So that's 3 votes for refusal. Members against that proposal? 1, 2, 3, 4. And
I abstain.
you're abstaining. Right, okay. So the proposal to refuse fails. Bring forward the original proposal. In that case, that is the only other option available to us. Members wishing to support the proposal to support this application, supplemented by the entries in the members' update, could you please indicate if you wish to support it?
1, 2, 3, 4.
4, and the rest of you are against. 3 votes.
2, 3.
And 1 abstention. So that application is approved by 4 votes, with 3 against and 1 abstention. We now move on to the next application, which is 29 Cotsmead Woodland. Members, settle down please. Right, we now come on to the application which members are already familiar with for 29 Cotsmead. As you know, members, we previously considered an application for a substantial extension of this property, and we attended a site visit. We viewed it from the subject property and also from the neighbours' properties on either side. As you know, that came to the Planning Committee with a recommendation for approval, which the Planning Committee disagreed with, and we refused. It went to appeal, and the Planning Inspector backed the Planning Committee's decision to refuse. So we now have a fresh application before us, which I assume is attempting to address the concerns expressed by the Planning Inspector. So go straight to you. Application. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Okay. So the current application is one that was similar to that which was refused at committee in September and I had to dismiss it at the end of October. As can be seen from the description on the screen, it's similar to the previous, with the exception of the reduced scale of the rear 2-storey extension and the removal of the first floor of the side extension. Members have visited the site and viewed the mixed and varied character of the street scene along with Cotsmead. Following the previous proposal refusal at committee, the inspector's report highlighted 2 main issues for consideration. These were the effect on the proposed development on A, the character of the appearance of the surrounding area, and B, on the living conditions of neighbouring dwellings. The impact on the character of the area was deemed to be acceptable, so this won't be presented at length, while the reasons for refusal were based on the second of these main issues, due to the harmfully unneighbourly impacts on number 27.
Mr. Chairman,
Excuse me, I can't hear a word. Sorry.
Yeah, we'll just suspend things a moment. Okay.
The
It was a big humming sound.
You scared it off. Carry on. You scared it off.
Apologies. Yeah, the main concern to be considered with the current proposal is therefore how this has addressed the issue. The slide shows the current proposal with the previous two-storey elements marked. Here is the previously refused proposal overlaid onto the current proposal. As can be seen, a substantial amount of bulk has been removed at the first floor level as perceived from the front and side elevations and the block plan on the previous page, which highlights the extent of the previous two-storey element. The inspector found that only the impact on number 27 was harmful. It was concluded that the side extension would appear aggressive from the first floor side bedroom, which is served by one window, but it was not concluded that there would be a harmful loss of light to this room. What was previously a two-storey side extension has been reduced to a single storey, which is set off the boundary and is therefore no longer considered to be harmful to the first floor bedroom. The existing 7-metre first floor gap is therefore largely retained. The inspector's other basis for refusal was overbearing impact to 27's rear amenity space, due to the side rear extensions being set in close quarters to the side boundary. The impact of this has been greatly minimised by setting the rear extension further 2 metres away from the boundary and shortening the projection by 1 metre, that's the two-storey element. When offset with the demolition of the existing garage, it's considered that the two-storey extension would be adequately set in from the boundary and its projection would be of a suitable scale that is typical of two-storey rear extensions. As such, it is considered that the overbearing impact on the rear amenity space will no longer be harmful. The previous extension was deemed by the inspector not to be visually oppressive to number 31, and given the reduction in scale, this is considered to remain the case. With regard to the impact on character of the area, the inspector had no issue given the varied street scene. As such, the changes to the public elevation are not considered harmful or out of place with the character of proximity. Therefore, the application is recommended for approval.
Okay, thank you, James. Now we have Woodley Town Council, representative of Woodley Town Council. Tom Barker?
Yes, Tom Barker. Yes, good evening. I'm Tom Barker from Woodley Town Council. I'm the councillor for Reading East and where Foxmead resides. I'm also on the Plans Committee. We actually have the same objections that we had before, the previous proposal with appeal was refused, as you know. So overdevelopment of the plot, it's overbearing, there's a massive effect on the neighbourhood properties, loss of light and loss of privacy for adjacent properties, and also loss of privacy for gardens. A number of neighbours have complained, and others on the road as well, objecting to this development. So specifically, Foxmead is a road, as you've seen, with detached properties, mainly with large gaps between them. We believe that this development sort of fills the full width of this particular property and or this plot, creating a terraced effect, which is actually uncharacteristic of this particular road. And we really don't want to set a precedent. The mass and the bulk of the new development, the depth of this is actually 17 metres, which is 55 feet. To put that into real terms, that's like 3 typical living rooms in depth for this house. It's absolutely huge. It's approximately a doubling in size of the original house as well. So the third issue we have is that it does affect the neighbours, particularly those to the west. This house is an older 1930s style, built with windows front, rear and on the sides, which is different than normal. The kitchen, I mean, the officer mentioned the bedroom, but the kitchen downstairs has north-facing windows as well as an east-facing window. And the rear kitchen is only lit by light from the light spill over from the kitchen, plus a half-glazed door. So it's actually quite dark, and it can only get darker. The new development does overlook this property via 5 windows and a door. Light will be cut, and we're concerned for the downstairs, or the upstairs, I have to say. So, Woodley Town Council recommends refusal to this plan. However, we would like to point out that if this is passed, then there should be a condition put in there stating that there should be no multiple occupancy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then we've got two others. Well, we've got 3 names: Eddie, Jane, Ralph, or Nick Way. So who is speaking, and how are you sharing your maximum of 3 minutes?
We'll do it together.
Okay.
I'll do the first 30 seconds or something.
I'll
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That's fine, yeah, that's fine. As I say, you've got 3 minutes between you.
Let me speak at my age. We'll do our best. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. This is a long-running saga, as you probably heard. Our view is that the overall structure is still overbearing, and if allowed to go ahead, as Councillor Barker has said, will actually become the biggest development in Cotsmead in terms of size. And there are windows now planned for the side of the building, which will reduce privacy to both sides, which is number 27 and number 31 on that side. However, my main concern from the 31 point of view is that the proposed crown roof, okay, which in fact will be raised, covers the whole building. That's both the existing building as well as the extension. Overall, there are no measurements, only scales on the plan. So a millimetres difference to join is half a metre in actual distance. And so this new elevation could be several metres higher than any other building. Because of the raised height, it will also put my house and my patio in the shade in the afternoon. The 45 degrees used by the planning department is a horizontal measurement and does not account for the loss of light vertically. Another problem is the southeast wall of 29 facing my building is inches from the boundary. And there's going to be building work undertaken on that in order to create a crown roof. I don't understand why the 1 metre rule applies to the new extension but doesn't apply to built or the current building. So we're saying that it's okay, you have to pull in a metre to go horizontally, but vertically you build as high as you want. Because of lack of space, they can't do this wall without putting scaffolding on my land, which I will not give access to. There's also a possibility that gutters and drainage pipes will overhang onto my land. I am not against an extension, I'm just after a reasonable one. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hannah?
How long's it got? Minute.
Thank you. I'm going to cut this very, very short. Right, the planner's report contains inaccuracies and omissions, it's incomplete, and it negates all the reasons put forward at previous committee meetings and by the 4 objectors. Referring to the respective report of the 6th of November, paragraph 6, 10, 13, 15, 16, 17, 18, 20 and 22, criticising the effect of the proposal. In sum, DG is not a statutory instrument. The proposal will be harmful, unneighbourly, contrary to CP3. The objective NPPI would be severely compromised, and it would be overbearing to next door and its garden. I'd like to point out the proposed accommodation is described as 5 bedrooms. This excludes 2 large dressing rooms and the hobbies room, which in total could easily be converted to 9 bedrooms. Cotsmead is a private cul-de-sac owned, managed and maintained by the Residents Association. It is not as described a street or a public highway. And the proposed gap, totaling 49 inches between buildings on either side, is unacceptable. I'm also speaking for Mr. Turner, who's a respected fellow of the Royal Institute of British Architects, and he's been the architect responsible for a large part of the development of the road. I am, speaking for my father, a fellow of the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, and have dealt with planning in and around Reading for some 40 years. This has been at the highest level, including an expert witness in the Crown Court. The inspector's assessment, paragraph 16, by reasons of its mass, bulk, height and proximity, it would be perceived as overwhelmingly oppressive and overbearing, and its effects from next door.
Okay, could I ask you to summarise?
In sum.
God well be able to
I'm sorry. In sum, There are objections from both private individuals, the town council, councillors and professionals in the planning sphere. This committee has turned down the previous applications for the same reasons that remain extant this evening. Surely we can't all be wrong in our submissions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. And can I now invite Kate Haynes as local ward member to speak?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Thank you. Ward member,
Sorry, can you just turn that one off?
sorry.
Right, here.
Yeah, Kate Haynes, ward member for Coronation. The application, this has already been said, has come before us before. There have been some significant improvements to the last set of plans that we have. But I'm very concerned still about the impact on number 27 in particular. The bedroom of the lady of the house is still going to be impacted upon. We need to ensure that there is obscured glass going in if we do approve this. Loss of amenity generally, all I can say is going back over what all of our residents and Councillor Barker have already said, I urge you to take those all into account and considering your I'll get the word out in a minute. Help decision this evening, sorry. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We don't have a ward member, do we? No members on committee. So, there's several issues raised here. Obviously, the planning inspector, in his wisdom, decided to support us in our previous concerns. We now have a scheme back before us which has significantly reduced the bulk on one side of the property, certainly. The issues that I've heard about tonight are the issues about daylight. Perhaps you could elaborate a little bit on that as to how this fits in with the various 45-degree angles and so on. Issues about the gap with Mr. Chenk's property. My understanding is that issues about scaffolding and matters that involve trespass or potential trespass on land are absolutely nothing to do with the planning committee, so we should ignore those. And I'd also like to understand the position. There seem to be concerns raised that if this was to be approved, that it should be restricted from being a house of multiple occupation. I'm not sure what's the thinking behind that, but perhaps we can explore that as well. So let's see what members have to say. Who wishes to speak on this? Bob.
I'll go first. Yeah, I mean, looking at the drawings and plans and listening to the, I'll use the term inverted commas, expert people we've had speaking to us tonight, I am not convinced that it has been sufficiently reduced. I still think it's got an overbearing impact on number 27, which is my primary concern. I'm not too worried, although Mr. Chenk's going to be upset with me. I'm not too worried about number 31, but I take his points on board. But number 27 is my main concern, and I'm not supportive of this.
Michelle?
I'm also worried about number 27, especially in the first floor extension that seems to be there in the southeast elevation. It's going to be obscuring the lady of the house, her bedroom, and she is suffering from dementia. And this is something that all of us eventually may be stuck with. And it's something that we should take into account while doing this. I have no problems with the ground floor extension, but the first floor extension I have a problem with.
Could you just clarify the extent of the extensions on either side?
Jenny, just remind me, is there a site plan available up there? Just the layout? So that will be fine actually. I'm just trying to if you look on your update, page 16 of 17, and I'm just going to refer you, because it is a bit a bit confusing. I think if I just look at the diagram, the second one down, refuse scheme overlaid on proposed south-east and south-west elevations. So not the top one, the second but the bottom. What's now been proposed is instead of having two-storey side extension, that you'll see in a dotted line that on the south-east elevation there's a two-storey side extension. That was on the refuse scheme. That's been removed now. So what's proposed is a pitched roof with a single story element. So the only thing that's new on that elevation, on that side, if you like, facing number 27, is actually a single story lean-to element now. Okay, that makes sense?
Yeah, the picture you had before this was very confusing to say the least.
Yeah, so just moving to the next door one, but previously what you ended up with is...
Claire is currently referring to the bottom right of the full drawings.
Do you mind putting that one up again? Do you mind if I stand up?
Chairman, might it be helpful to show the side elevation?
Well, I'll do that in a minute.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so, that doesn't help, does it? Right, let's see if I can do this without getting in the way. This was originally proposed, and that was refused because of the overbearing impact. It's coming closer. This is now only additional element on the side. Okay. So if you look at it from the rear, what previously had proposed was something that came right out here. So this elevation, this two-storey element, came right out to the boundary. Now it doesn't, so it's set off the boundary by just a single-storey bit. So it's coming away from the boundary quite considerably. Also, the depth of the rear elevation has reduced. So that's this bit. So if you're looking at it from the side, if you like, from number 27 sits about here at the moment. The extent of their house sits about there, where my pen is. So if you look at it, that's existing, and then the extended bit is set quite far away because they're only coming out on the back, which is actually set right off the boundary. So consequently, have you got the other side elevation? Okay, maybe you can refer to the update sheet then again. At the top, there is that side elevation shown, and that's shown. It shows it's just a single story again. And if you take it away, if you look at the boundary, the actual two-story element is offset quite significantly.
I'll ask the question, but I think I fear I know the answer. We don't have the relevant volume calculations of what was proposed and what's in.
No.
That would be quite helpful in further understanding the reduction.
No, I think, sorry Chairman, no, we haven't done that because it's not countryside, so we wouldn't necessarily take it into account.
All right. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry to butt in.
I don't normally allow interruptions, so I'm not going to make an exception. Okay.
Rather late, Chairman, could we have a special map?
Because
no, sorry.
Interpretation is wrong.
Okay.
I'm sorry, its presentation is wrong.
What's wrong about the presentation? All right.
We will say anyway. That's just fact.
That's the fact. I'd ask my speaker for people to take note of all those windows that will be within 1 metre of my property in that elevation. 4 of them are new.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Can you comment?
I appreciate your
thank you.
consideration.
Obviously,
Oh, I'm sorry.
yeah, so as you can see on the diagram, the windows at the ground floor level are within 1 metre of the boundary, so they're going to be new windows. Currently, I'm not sure about the existing elevation, but currently there's a single obscure glazed window in between those two windows at the first floor level.
That was your point, you wanted obscure glazed glass, which it has, that's confirmed.
Yeah, that's confirmed. As exists, there is one window in between those two obscure glazed windows there, so that those windows aren't being brought any closer to number 27, that the 7 metre gap is to be retained between the side elevation of 27 and this side elevation.
Okay, so it's 7 metres gap at first floor level?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, other members wishing to speak? Chris?
Sorry, just a very quick one there. The windows on the ground floor, are they obscure glass?
No. Because have boundary treatment.
Yeah, the windows would look directly onto the existing boundary. There's currently a detached garage at number 27 and also a shed there, and they would look direct. They wouldn't afford any views over the existing boundary treatment.
Thank you.
Okay. Chris B, you want to?
Yes. This is a considerable reduction in the eaves height. It's a matter of judgment, isn't it? It's interesting that the refused application was, of course, approved by the officers. So we're going to have a huge, if we're considering refusing this, there's a huge gap in what the officers originally approved and what we're having difficulty with.
Officers originally recommended?
Yes, they recommended approval. So their view and ours is, if we're thinking of refusing, there's quite a gap between us. I'm inclined to say that the reduction is sufficient.
Any other members, Rochelle? No.
I was wondering if we could remove any kind of more development so he doesn't come back next year with another one to increase it to this size again. I know we can't, but I just would be like, I would like to.
We can.
Can we try to suggest that he no longer have any more development so it won't become any bigger than it is right now?
Hang on, what's the position of permitted development rights?
If they're going at 2-storey to anywhere near the boundary, then they'd automatically need planning permission anyways, because there's 2-storey element that you're worried about. You could, the rear single storey could now go to 8 metres deep without needing planning permission, but if the neighbour objects, at that stage we'd have to consider it, so it needs full application.
This is these temporary arrangement of these householder extensions.
Yes, I know, but
so in a sense, they've got a very limited ability to extend further without coming back to us as a local planning authority to consider it as part of a planning application in one form or another.
Okay.
But we could remove PD rights if you members wanted to fail safe.
Yeah, I think members will feel comfortable with that. So if we could add a condition removing all permitted development rights. The next thing I want to cover is this issue of house in multiple occupation. I'm not sure what the grounds are for that. I don't know who's best advisors on that, Claire or...
Yes, there needs to be a basis on which to take those rights away. Normally, up to 6 people living together as a family unit wouldn't need planning permission. Anything over and above that would. There needs to be a special...
Sorry, Claire. Sorry, that's not the case. If I happen to have 5 children, that means there's 7 people in my family. I don't need planning permission for that. Not last time I checked.
No, but there's no argument. The general rule is if there's 6 different people from different family and yes, then they're living together as a family, then generally you would need planning permission. That is the general case law. It's different because yes, you can have people have 13 children. It doesn't mean that you need planning permission for it.
They should.
He should have planning permission.
So the general rule is, now normally there's a number of reasons why we would justify removing the community development rights for the impact a HMO would have. One would be the impact on the character of the area when you've got a lot together, because you end up, you've got a lot of that type of accommodation that could change the overall character. I think as a one-off here, it would be unlikely we'd be able to justify that. Secondly, would be a parking reason, but you've got loads of parking on the front potentially, so again, to remove it on that basis, in my view, would be unreasonable. And I'm just trying to think of any other reason which would justify that removing that PD rights. And in my view, Chairman, I think that it would be very difficult to justify.
Okay.
But saying that, we could put that condition on there. But I think if it was appealed, we wouldn't be able to substantiate it.
I don't see there's grounds to afford that. We've also heard that it will be, in reference to it being the tallest or the largest house. I don't really consider that to be a planning matter, because in any given road there's always going to be a house that's tallest and largest and one that's going to be smallest. So I don't think that's something that we should specifically address. The other thing was the issue about the 1 metre gap between the proposed development and Mr. Cheng's house. Can you just get some clarity on that?
The eastern elevation to number 31, which is Mr. Cheng's house, is, as you can see, is to be unaltered from at the side from the current proposal, which was the case.
I don't think that's an issue. Right, members, I see no one else wishing to speak. Does anyone wish to put an alternative proposal forward? Bob, you do. You've got 30 seconds or so to do.
I propose refusal on the grounds that it's still, in my opinion, detrimental to the neighbours and due to overbearing mass and park.
Okay. Is anyone wishing to second that? Rochelle. Okay, so we have a valid proposal to refuse it on the basis of mass, bulk and detriment to both members. Okay, all right. Members wish to support that. Could you please indicate if you wish to support that proposal for refusal? It's 3. Okay, so I'm afraid that falls away.
To vote?
Yeah. Yes, so those against? It's 5. Okay, all right. So we now come to the substantive proposal, which is the amended application on this site. All those members wishing to support the officer recommendation, please indicate. And that's carried by 5 votes to 3. Thank you, members. That concludes the discussion of the planning